The complete history of MKULTRA. The 20th century was marked by rapid advances in science and technology, accompanied by unprecedented global conflict and ideological struggle. In the aftermath of World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union entered a Cold War defined by espionage, propaganda, and the pursuit of psychological dominance. Against this backdrop, fears of brainwashing and enemy mind control programs spread throughout American intelligence circles. It was in this atmosphere of paranoia and ambition that the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, launched Project MKUltra in 1953. Spearheaded by Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, a chemist and covert operations expert, MKUltra was a sprawling program that explored chemical, biological, and psychological methods of manipulating human behavior. Over 2 decades, it encompassed more than 100 sub-projects, conducted experiments on unwitting subjects, and violated basic human rights under the banner of national security. Though shrouded in secrecy for years, MKUltra came to light in the 1970s through congressional investigations, journalistic exposés, and Freedom of Information Act disclosures. Its revelations shocked the public and forced a reckoning over the ethics of government research, contributing to stricter guidelines for human experimentation. Yet even today, MKUltra remains both a cautionary tale and a source of fascination, fueling conspiracy theories, cultural works, and ongoing debate over the balance between security and liberty. Let's take a look at the complete history of MKUltra, its Cold War origins, the methods and experiments it employed, the key figures and victims involved, its eventual exposure and cover-up attempts, and its enduring legacy. Cold War climate and origins. The origins of MKUltra lie firmly in the anxieties of the early Cold War. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, the United States was gripped by fear of communist expansion, nuclear escalation, and psychological warfare. The Korean War, 1950–1953, intensified these fears, particularly after reports surfaced that captured American soldiers had confessed to war crimes and espoused communist rhetoric. U.S. officials speculated that these confessions were the result of advanced Soviet or Chinese brainwashing techniques. At the same time, intelligence reports suggested that both the Soviet Union and China were experimenting with drugs and hypnosis to control behavior. Whether or not these claims were exaggerated, they were taken seriously by U.S. policymakers and spurred the CIA into action. If America's adversaries were developing mind control methods, it was imperative that the United States not fall behind. The CIA had already dabbled in behavioral experimentation under Project Bluebird, 1950, and Project Artichoke, 1951. These programs explored the use of hypnosis, electroshock, and truth drugs like sodium pentothal and cannabis derivatives for interrogation. They also investigated whether individuals could be conditioned to carry out acts against their will, an idea that later inspired fictional depictions of Manchurian candidates. In 1953, CIA Director Allen Dulles formally approved the expansion of these efforts under a new umbrella program, MKUltra. The name itself followed CIA convention, with MK denoting projects run by the agency's technical services staff and Ultra signaling the highest classification level. The program was placed under the leadership of Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, a chemist who had already overseen the CIA's earlier behavioral projects. Dulles framed MKUltra as a response to Soviet advances in brain perversion techniques. In a speech at Princeton University in 1953, he warned that America faced a new battlefield where mind warfare could be as decisive as nuclear weapons. With a mandate to explore the frontiers of behavioral control, Gottlieb was given unprecedented freedom and resources. MKUltra was born not as a fringe experiment, but as a central pillar of America's Cold War psychological arsenal. Methods, experiments, and sub-projects. MKUltra was not a single project, but a network of 149 sub-projects conducted through universities, hospitals, prisons, and covert safe houses. Many of these were disguised as legitimate research funded through front organizations like the Society for the investigation of human ecology. The program's breadth reflected the CIA's desperation to find any technique, chemical, biological, or psychological, that might yield a reliable method of controlling the human mind. LSD and psychedelics. The most infamous aspect of MKULTRA was its experimentation with LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide. Discovered in 1943 by Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann, LSD fascinated the CIA as a potential truth serum or incapacitating agent. Gottlieb oversaw widespread distribution of LSD to researchers and operatives, often without their knowledge. Experiments involved CIA employees, military personnel, prisoners, mental hospital patients, and civilians who were unaware they had been drugged. Some subjects experienced terrifying hallucinations and long-term psychological trauma. In one notorious incident, CIA scientist Frank Olson was secretly dosed with LSD at a retreat and later died under suspicious circumstances. The CIA also ran Operation Midnight Climax, a sub-project in which safe houses in San Francisco and New York were staffed by sex workers paid to lure men into drugged encounters. Behind two-way mirrors, CIA agents observed the effects of LSD on unwitting subjects, studying how the drug might be used for manipulation or blackmail. LSD research and testing. Origins and rationale. The cornerstone of MKUltra was the investigation of lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD, and other hallucinogens as tools for behavioral control. The CIA, during the early Cold War era, was deeply concerned about the potential for Soviet and Chinese brainwashing techniques, spurred by reports of indoctrination of American POWs during the Korean War. The agency sought a chemical means to extract information, induce compliance, or destabilize subjects mentally, ideally without their awareness. LSD, discovered in 1938 and first widely studied in the 1940s, was identified as a candidate due to its profound effects on perception, cognition, and mood. Implementation and methods. Research involved both laboratory experiments and field testing, often on unwilling participants. Volunteers included university students, prisoners, and mental patients, but a significant portion of testing involved unwitting subjects, people administered LSD without consent. Major operations included controlled laboratory studies. Researchers observed subjects' physiological and psychological responses, documenting hallucinations, emotional swings, and suggestibility. Tests were sometimes paired with psychological assessments, stressors, or other drugs to gauge synergistic effects. Field trials in safe houses. In projects such as Operation Midnight Climax, individuals were lured to CIA-run brothels in San Francisco and New York City, secretly dosed with LSD and monitored via one-way mirrors. Observers recorded behavioral responses, sexual activity, and susceptibility to suggestion. Dosage and delivery research. The CIA tested multiple administration methods, oral, intravenous, and through beverages or food, to determine the most effective covert delivery systems. They also explored microdosing for subtle behavioral manipulation. The experiments were overseen by chemists, psychiatrists, and behavioral scientists, many recruited through academic grants disguised as legitimate research funding, such as through the Human Ecology Fund. Key findings and outcomes. The LSD testing produced a range of outcomes. Psychological effects. Subjects often experienced extreme anxiety, paranoia, dissociation, and hallucinations. In some cases, LSD induced psychotic-like episodes or long-term psychological trauma. Behavioral manipulation. While LSD altered perception and mood, researchers found it unreliable as a tool for coercion or truth extraction. Responses were highly individual, and some subjects became violent or non-compliant, complicating operational objectives. Experiments demonstrated that context, and setting dramatically influenced outcomes. Environmental control was as important as chemical dosage in shaping behavior. Despite limited success in operational terms, LSD research became the signature symbol of MKULTRA, influencing later investigations into mind control, hypnosis, and other psychoactive compounds. Ethical considerations and legacy. The LSD experiments are among the most ethically troubling elements of MKULTRA. The routine use of non-consenting participants and the long-term psychological harm caused led to intense scrutiny once the program was exposed in the 1970s. The project highlighted the dangers of government-sanctioned human experimentation without oversight and contributed to modern regulations on informed consent in clinical and psychological research. Safe houses for unwitting dosing, Operation Midnight Climax. Origins and rationale. As part of MKULTRA's broader experimentation with LSD and other psychoactive substances, the CIA sought controlled environments in which they could observe unknowing subjects. The idea was to replicate field conditions while maintaining observational control, allowing intelligence officers to study the psychological and behavioral effects of drugs without laboratory constraints. This effort culminated in the creation of secret CIA-run safe houses, often referred to in declassified documents as Operation Midnight Climax. The rationale was straightforward. If LSD could be used operationally as a truth serum, mind control agent, or incapacitant, the CIA needed to see how it affected people in real-world social settings, bars, brothels, or urban apartments, rather than sterile lab environments. Implementation and methods. The Safe House program was primarily based in San Francisco and New York City. The CIA recruited prostitutes and handlers to lure subjects, typically men seeking casual sexual encounters, into the safe houses. Once inside, subjects were secretly administered LSD or other drugs via beverages, food, or injections. One-way mirrors and hidden recording devices allowed CIA operatives to observe behavior in real time. Observers documented sexual behavior, compliance, suggestibility, and emotional reactions. The facilities were designed for maximum control and secrecy. The CIA even installed mirrored windows, soundproofing, and discrete entry and exit points. Operators used the data to evaluate not just the effects of drugs, but also psychological manipulations in combination with sexual stimuli, reflecting a disturbing interest in exploiting human vulnerability. Key findings and outcomes. Safe House experiments revealed a number of critical insights. Subject unpredictability. Unwitting participants responded in highly varied ways. Some displayed extreme euphoria and openness, while others experienced panic attacks, paranoia, or aggressive resistance. Context-dependent responses. Environmental cues and social context significantly influenced the psychological effects of LSD, confirming later insights about set and setting in psychedelic research. Operational limitations. While the safe houses allowed detailed observation, the unpredictability and ethical violations made the program unsuitable for widespread operational deployment. Despite these limitations, the Safe House program provided unique insights into human behavior under drug influence, and it became one of the most infamous and ethically controversial components of MKULTRA. Ethical considerations and legacy. The ethical violations were extreme. Subjects were completely unaware they were being dosed, exposing them to psychological trauma and potential long-term harm. Once declassified in the 1970s, the program fueled public outrage and contributed to tighter regulations on human experimentation, especially regarding informed consent. Today, Operation Midnight Climax remains a symbol of the dangers of unregulated intelligence experimentation, demonstrating how the pursuit of operational knowledge can override basic human rights. Sensory deprivation and psychological stress. MKULTRA also explored methods of breaking down the human psyche through sensory deprivation, isolation, and sleep deprivation. Experiments subjected subjects to prolonged periods in sensory deprivation tanks, or blasted them with repeated audio loops while under the influence of drugs. These methods aimed to erode resistance and create a malleable mental state. Hypnosis and behavioral conditioning. Some sub-projects investigated hypnosis combined with drug use to induce altered states of consciousness. Researchers explored whether individuals could be conditioned to perform actions against their moral code or to forget specific events entirely. Though results were inconsistent, the CIA believed these methods might be useful for covert operations. Hypnosis experiments. Origins and rationale. Hypnosis became a major focus within MKULTRA because CIA scientists believed it could be a powerful tool for interrogation, memory manipulation, and behavioral control. Influenced by early Cold War reports of brainwashing in Korea, the CIA explored whether hypnotic techniques could enhance suggestibility, implant false memories, induce amnesia, or compel individuals to act against their will. Hypnosis research was seen as potentially complementary to LSD testing, combining chemical and psychological methods to create controllable subjects. Implementation and methods. Hypnosis experiments were conducted in laboratories, academic institutions, and specialized safe house facilities. Key aspects included screening for susceptibility. Subjects were evaluated using standardized scales to determine hypnotic suggestibility, as not everyone responds equally to hypnotic induction. Combination with drugs. Researchers tested the interaction between LSD or sedatives and hypnosis, hypothesizing that psychoactive compounds could deepen suggestibility or lower resistance. Memory and behavior manipulation. Experiments included attempts to erase or alter memories, induce amnesia, or implant post-hypnotic triggers for certain behaviors. Operational training. CIA operatives were sometimes taught hypnotic induction and observation techniques, intending to apply these skills in the field for intelligence-gathering purposes. Institutions involved included universities, psychiatric hospitals, and private research facilities, many funded covertly through CIA-front organizations such as the Human Ecology Fund. Key findings and outcomes. Variability of response. While some subjects displayed heightened suggestibility under hypnosis, many could not be reliably manipulated to perform specific acts, particularly violent or high-risk behaviors. Memory effects. Hypnosis occasionally induced temporary amnesia or altered recall, but implantation of complex or operationally useful memories proved largely ineffective. Combined drug hypnosis trials. Adding LSD or other sedatives sometimes increased compliance or disorientation, but also increased unpredictable reactions, including panic or extreme psychological value of hypnosis, while promising in theory, remained limited due to inconsistent results and ethical concerns. Ethical considerations and legacy. Hypnosis experiments, particularly on unwitting or vulnerable participants, violated basic human rights and informed consent principles. In some cases, subjects suffered long-term psychological trauma. These experiments, along with LSD and safe-house testing, became central examples in congressional investigations of MKUltra, illustrating the CIA's willingness to prioritize intelligence objectives over human welfare. Despite operational limitations, hypnosis research influenced later studies in psychotherapy, interrogation techniques, and understanding suggestibility, though today it is tightly regulated in clinical contexts. Universities and front organizations. To carry out its research, the CIA funneled money through fronts to universities and private institutions. Professors and graduate students often accepted funding without realizing its true source. Studies on stress, cognition, and hallucinogens conducted at respected institutions like Stanford and Harvard were in some cases tied to MKUltra. Human Ecology Fund, HEF, and academic fronts. Origins and rationale. One of MKULTRA's most insidious and effective mechanisms for conducting covert research was through academic front organizations, most prominently the Human Ecology Fund, HEF. The HEF was created in the early 1950s as a CIA-funded nonprofit ostensibly dedicated to anthropological, sociological, and psychological research. Its true purpose, however, was to serve as a pass-through funding mechanism for MKULTRA subprojects, allowing the CIA to sponsor experiments in universities and research institutions without revealing its involvement. The rationale was strategic. Direct CIA funding of human experimentation would have attracted scrutiny and ethical condemnation. By using intermediaries like HEF, the agency could fund a wide array of behavioral research, including drug testing, hypnosis, and psychological manipulation, under the guise of legitimate academic inquiry. This allowed access to top-tier researchers and institutions, effectively blending clandestine intelligence objectives with civilian scientific work. Implementation and methods. The HEF operated by channeling grants to researchers in psychology, psychiatry, and behavioral sciences. The CIA leveraged a network of cooperating scientists, often unaware of the full scope of MKULTRA, to design and execute experiments that aligned with intelligence objectives. Key characteristics included: indirect funding structure. HEF grants were distributed to universities, hospitals, and research labs, often labeled as general, behavioral studies, or stress research. Funds were allocated with minimal oversight, ensuring operational secrecy while maintaining academic legitimacy. Diverse experimental objectives. Projects funded through HEF covered drug administration, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, sleep manipulation, and other behavioral studies. This included both voluntary experiments with informed consent and covert testing on unwitting participants. Institutional reach. HEF-supported projects took place at prestigious institutions, including Columbia University, Stanford University, and Harvard, as well as lesser-known medical facilities. This academic legitimacy provided a protective shield against public scrutiny, allowing researchers to conduct ethically questionable work under the umbrella of legitimate science. Operational liaison. CIA operatives maintained secret oversight of HEF-funded projects, periodically collecting reports, refining experimental protocols, and redirecting research focus toward operationally relevant goals. Key experiments and subprojects. Through HEF, the CIA indirectly funded numerous subprojects that would later become infamous. Some of the primary areas included: psychotropic drug testing. HEF-funded researchers administered LSD, mescaline, and other psychoactive substances to human subjects, analyzing effects on perception, memory, and compliance. Hypnosis studies. HEF projects explored hypnotic susceptibility, memory manipulation, and post-hypnotic suggestion, sometimes in combination with drugs to enhance results. Behavioral conditioning and sensory deprivation. HEF grants supported long-term studies on the effects of isolation, sleep disruption, and repetitive auditory or visual stimuli, often as preparatory research for coercive interrogation techniques. Cross-cultural behavioral research. Anthropologists and sociologists funded via HEF conducted studies on social influence, conformity, and authority structures, producing knowledge useful for manipulating populations in operational contexts. In all cases, the HEF allowed the CIA to blend clandestine research objectives with legitimate academic inquiry, creating a network of studies that looked innocuous on paper but were closely aligned with intelligence goals. Ethical considerations and controversy. The HEF exemplifies the murky intersection of government secrecy and academic ethics. While some participating researchers were unaware of the CIA's involvement, others were complicit in facilitating experiments that violated informed consent and human rights. Controversial aspects include unwitting subjects. HEF projects sometimes involved participants who were unaware they were being experimented on, especially in drug testing or behavioral conditioning studies. Long-term harm. Some experiments caused psychological trauma, permanent memory alteration, or other lasting harm. Notably, patients subjected to psychic driving and combined drug hypnosis techniques suffered severe consequences. Academic complicity. The HEF blurred the lines between science and espionage, leaving some researchers unwittingly complicit in unethical intelligence programs. This fueled later investigations and public outrage once MKUltra was exposed. Despite these issues, HEF provided a highly effective cover for MKUltra, allowing the CIA to systematically explore the limits of human behavior and control in ways that would have been impossible under direct agency sponsorship. Legacy and influence. The legacy of HEF and other academic fronts is complex. Scientific contributions. While many findings were ethically compromised, some HEF-funded research contributed to legitimate fields such as psychopharmacology, stress research, and human behavior studies. Policy and oversight reforms. Revelations about HEF's covert role fueled the establishment of institutional review boards, IRBs, stricter ethical standards, and regulations requiring informed consent in human subject research. Cultural impact. The discovery that prestigious universities had been unknowingly involved in clandestine CIA experiments eroded public trust in both intelligence agencies and academic institutions. Operational precedent. HEF demonstrated the effectiveness of using front organizations to conduct secretive, ethically dubious research, a tactic that would inform later intelligence operations. Biological and chemical agents. Beyond psychedelics, MKUltra also investigated chemical incapacitating agents and biological toxins. Some sub-projects overlapped with the CIA's chemical and biological warfare programs, raising concerns about the weaponization of psychological science. Methods ranged from the bizarre to the brutal, united only by their disregard for informed consent. Prisoners, psychiatric patients, and marginalized populations were often targeted precisely because they lacked the power to resist or expose the experiments. Biological and chemical toxins research. Origins and rationale. Within MKUltra's broad mandate to explore behavioral modification, mind control, and covert operational capabilities, the CIA recognized that chemical and biological agents could serve as powerful tools for both intelligence gathering and incapacitation. By the early 1950s, fears of Soviet and Chinese use of poisons, toxins, and chemical agents against U.S. personnel motivated an ambitious program to study these substances for potential offensive and defensive applications. Sidney Gottlieb, the chief chemist of MKUltra, spearheaded this effort, with a mandate to discover agents that could subtly manipulate or incapacitate individuals, often without their knowledge. The rationale included multiple operational goals. 1. Interrogation, developing substances to weaken mental resistance, enhance compliance, or induce memory disruption. 2. Incapacitation, creating fast-acting or long-duration agents to neutralize individuals temporarily or permanently. 3. Covert deployment, testing chemicals that could be introduced in food, beverages, or aerosol sprays without detection. 4. Defensive research, understanding the effects of toxic agents for protection against foreign adversaries. Implementation and methods. The chemical and biological component of MKUltra was extensive and multifaceted. It involved isolation and synthesis of toxins. MKUltra chemists investigated natural toxins such as abrin, ricin, and staphylococcal enterotoxin B, and synthetic compounds designed to interfere with neurology or cardiovascular function. Delivery systems research. The CIA explored ways to administer toxins covertly, including aerosols, food or drink adulteration, and delivery via everyday objects. Gadgets and microdosing methods were designed for field operatives to deploy toxins without detection. Laboratory testing on animals and humans. Initial studies were conducted on animal models to determine lethality, latency, and physiological impact. Later, some human trials, sometimes unwitting, assessed psychological effects, incapacitation thresholds, and long-term consequences. Field simulations, safehouse trials, and controlled urban tests were conducted to study dispersal patterns, absorption rates, and detection challenges. Significant attention was given to substances that combined psychoactive and physiological effects, aiming to produce disorientation, suggestibility, or compliance, along with temporary incapacitation. LSD, though primarily a hallucinogen, was sometimes combined with toxins to explore synergistic effects on mental state. Key experiments and findings. The chemical and biological branch of MKULTRA produced some notable results. 1. Toxin potency and latency. Compounds like abrin and ricin were highly toxic in minimal doses, but operational deployment proved difficult due to handling risks, unpredictability, and delayed effects. 2. Psychoactive toxic combinations. Combining sedatives or hallucinogens with mild toxins produced varying outcomes. In some cases, subjects became compliant or disoriented. In others, reactions were chaotic or violently adverse. 3. Delivery feasibility. CIA operatives developed covert administration methods, such as microcapsules, powders, or liquids disguised in beverages, but achieving operational reliability was a persistent challenge. 4. Unintended consequences. Many compounds caused long-term organ damage, psychological trauma, or fatalities, highlighting the ethical and practical hazards of these experiments. While some agents were eventually deemed too unpredictable for operational use, the research expanded the CIA's knowledge of human toxicology, drug interactions, and covert delivery techniques. It also laid the groundwork for later programs in counterinsurgency and clandestine operations. Ethical considerations and controversy. MKULTRA's toxin research is among the most ethically fraught aspects of the program. Issues included unwitting human experimentation. Some individuals, including civilians and military personnel, were exposed to toxic or psychoactive agents without consent. Potential lethality. The very substances studied had a high risk of death or permanent injury, raising profound ethical concerns. Long-term harm. Surviving subjects often experienced psychological trauma, physiological impairment, or lingering health problems. Secrecy and oversight failure. The experiments were deliberately conducted outside normal legal and medical oversight, reflecting a Cold War-era prioritization of operational objectives over human welfare. The exposure of these experiments in the 1970s generated widespread public outrage and contributed to reforms in human experimentation ethics, including mandatory informed consent and institutional review boards. Legacy and influence. The legacy of MKULTRA's toxin research is multifaceted. 1. Scientific contribution. While ethically compromised, the program generated detailed toxicological data and operational insights into chemical agents, physiological and psychological effects. 2. Operational precedent. The combination of chemical knowledge with covert delivery methods influenced later CIA field operations, military research, and counterterrorism tactics. 3. Cultural impact. Revelations about the program fueled public distrust of intelligence agencies, shaping perceptions of government secrecy, Cold War paranoia, and ethical boundaries. 4. Policy changes. Oversight reforms and ethical guidelines in biomedical research were strengthened in response to these experiments, helping prevent similar abuses in future decades. Drug synergy and antagonist research. Origins and rationale. Within MKULTRA, the CIA quickly realized that psychoactive substances alone might not reliably produce the desired operational effects. Researchers sought to understand how drugs interacted with each other and how certain compounds could enhance, neutralize, or counteract the effects of hallucinogens, sedatives, or stimulants. This branch of research aimed to achieve precise control over behavior, cognition, and emotional state, potentially enabling operatives to manipulate targets in interrogation, covert operations, or psychological warfare. Drug synergy and antagonist research served three primary goals: amplifying desired effects, combining substances to maximize compliance, suggestibility, or emotional breakdown; mitigating adverse reactions, developing countermeasures to reduce panic, aggression, or long-term psychological damage during experiments or field operations; operational flexibility, identifying chemical toolkits that could be tailored to different scenarios, subjects, or environments, from safe houses to battlefield contexts; implementation and methods. The research was conducted through controlled laboratory experiments, field trials, and later, indirect testing via academic partners.
Combination
Key
trials.
methodologies. Researchers systematically tested hallucinogens, LSD, mescaline, alongside sedatives, barbiturates, benzodiazepines, stimulants, amphetamine derivatives, and dissociative compounds to observe additive or interactive effects. Antagonist development. Substances that could neutralize or reverse hallucinogenic or sedative effects were tested, such as phenothiazines, antihistamines, or synthetic antidotes. These were critical for operational scenarios where subjects might need to be stabilized or debriefed safely. Behavioral assessments. Test subjects, ranging from volunteers to unwitting participants, underwent cognitive, emotional, and physiological evaluations during and after drug administration. This included observation of mood shifts, compliance, memory, and susceptibility to suggestion. Field simulation. Some experiments were conducted in safe house or urban settings to see how multiple drugs affected real-world interactions, social behavior, and decision-making. Key findings and outcomes. The research on drug synergy and antagonists yielded several insights. Unpredictable interactions, even carefully measured combinations, produced highly variable effects, influenced by individual physiology, prior exposure, and psychological state. In some cases, subjects experienced extreme confusion, aggression, or acute psychological crises. Partial success in compliance. Certain combinations, particularly sedative hallucinogen blends, temporarily increased suggestibility or emotional responsiveness, though not consistently enough for operational reliability. Antagonist utility. Some compounds successfully mitigated undesirable side effects, stabilizing subjects or reversing hallucinogenic states. This allowed more controlled experimental observation and operational flexibility. Long-term risks. Repeated or high-dose exposures caused lasting psychological trauma, memory impairment, and in some cases, permanent neurological effects, underscoring the ethical hazards of this research. Overall, while the findings advanced the CIA's understanding of pharmacology and human behavior under chemical influence, predictable behavioral control remained elusive. Ethical considerations and controversy. This branch of MKULTRA, like other subprojects, involved profound ethical violations. Non-consenting subjects. Many individuals were dosed without knowledge, creating severe risks of psychological or physiological harm. Long-term consequences. Experiments caused lasting mental health issues, including trauma, paranoia, and cognitive impairments. Secrecy and oversight failure. The clandestine nature of the experiments meant that no institutional review or informed consent safeguards were in place, violating both contemporary and modern ethical standards. The combination of covert administration and potentially dangerous chemical interactions made drug synergy research particularly controversial, illustrating the CIA's prioritization of operational goals over human welfare. Legacy and influence. Drug synergy and antagonist research influenced both intelligence operations and the broader scientific understanding of psychopharmacology. Scientific insights. The experiments yielded data on drug interactions, psychoactive pharmacology, and stress responses, though ethically compromised. Operational toolkit. The CIA gained knowledge on how to use chemical agents in combination and how to stabilize subjects when experiments or field operations went awry. Ethical reform. Revelations of these experiments contributed to institutional review boards, IRBs, informed consent laws, and regulations on human subject research. Cultural impact. Public awareness of these experiments fueled distrust of government agencies, skepticism about psychological research, and popular fascination with mind control and chemical manipulation. Electroencephalogram, EEG, and brainwave studies. Origins and rationale. MKULTRA's interest in brainwave monitoring and manipulation emerged from a growing awareness during the 1950s and 1960s of the potential to measure, influence, and predict human cognition and behavior through neurological signals. With the development of the electroencephalogram, EEG, researchers gained the ability to track brain electrical activity in real time. The CIA hypothesized that EEG could serve multiple operational purposes. Assessing susceptibility, identifying individuals most responsive to hypnosis, drugs, or behavioral conditioning. Measuring drug effects, monitoring the neurological impact of LSD, sedatives, and other psychoactive compounds. Behavioral prediction, investigating correlations between brainwave patterns and compliance, aggression, or memory retention. Control and manipulation, exploring whether targeted stimuli or interventions could influence cognition or induce specific mental states. The ultimate aim was to integrate neurophysiological data into behavioral control strategies, merging pharmacology, hypnosis, and psychological techniques with neurological insight. Implementation and methods. EEG studies were conducted in laboratory environments and occasionally integrated with other MKUltra experiments. Electrode placement and recording. Subjects had scalp electrodes attached to monitor alpha, beta, theta, and delta waves, providing continuous recordings of electrical activity during rest, cognitive tasks, or exposure to drugs. Drug interaction trials. Researchers studied how LSD, barbiturates, stimulants, and sedatives altered brainwave patterns, looking for predictable signatures associated with suggestibility, confusion, or heightened emotional states. Hypnosis and sensory manipulation. EEG recordings were used during hypnotic induction and sensory deprivation experiments to identify neurological correlates of trance states and dissociation. Data analysis and modeling. Patterns in EEG signals were analyzed to detect responses to stimuli, attempts at behavioral conditioning, and potential markers of vulnerability to manipulation. Integration with field experiments. Some EEG studies were conducted alongside safehouse trials and other operational testing to explore how real-world stresses and social environments affected neurological responses. Key findings and outcomes. The EEG studies produced both promising and frustrating results. Drug response variability. While certain psychoactive compounds consistently altered brainwave patterns, individual variability was significant. Factors such as prior drug exposure, psychological state, and baseline physiology often overshadowed experimental manipulations. Hypnosis and brainwave correlations. EEG could reliably detect deep hypnotic states, but translating this into operational behavioral control proved unreliable. Predictive limitations. Attempts to correlate brainwave patterns with susceptibility to interrogation, compliance, or behavioral manipulation were inconclusive. While trends emerged, the EEG could not reliably predict or enforce behavior. Despite limitations, EEG data helped refine dosing strategies, hypnotic protocols, and safe-house monitoring techniques, providing a scientific lens for previously anecdotal observations. Ethical considerations and controversy. As with other MKULTRA subprojects, EEG studies often involved non-consenting or vulnerable participants, including psychiatric patients and prisoners. Ethical issues included informed consent violations. Many subjects were unaware of electrode placement, drug administration, or the purpose of recordings. Psychological impact. EEG sessions, particularly when combined with hallucinogens, sensory deprivation, or hypnosis, sometimes caused stress, anxiety, or long-term trauma. Secrecy and oversight gaps. EEG research was conducted outside normal academic or medical oversight, highlighting the clandestine, experimental nature of MKULTRA. Despite being technologically sophisticated, EEG studies remained ethically compromised, contributing to later regulatory reforms in human subject research. Legacy and influence. EEG research under MKULTRA had both scientific and operational impacts. Neuroscience contribution. The work contributed to early understandings of brainwave patterns under psychoactive influence, hypnotic states, and cognitive stress, influencing later research in neuroscience and psychiatry. Operational framework. EEG studies informed the CIA's integration of neurological monitoring with behavioral research, shaping intelligence programs that sought to combine pharmacology, psychology, and neurophysiology. Ethical and regulatory impact. The misuse of EEG in MKULTRA fueled the development of strict ethical standards and institutional review boards for human experimentation. Cultural and historical significance. EEG experiments reinforced the public perception of MKULTRA as a highly secretive, scientifically sophisticated, yet ethically indefensible program. Magicians, tradecraft, and surreptitious techniques. Origins and rationale. One of the more unusual yet practical subprojects under MKULTRA was the study of magicians' techniques and their application to intelligence operations. The CIA recognized that illusion, misdirection, and sleight-of-hand methods, traditionally the domain of stage magicians, could be adapted to covertly administer drugs, manipulate perception, and control attention in field operations. This project stemmed from a core operational challenge. The agency needed techniques to influence or incapacitate targets without their awareness, often in public or semi-public settings. The rationale was multifaceted. 1. Covert dosing, administering drugs surreptitiously through food, drinks, or physical contact. 2. Psychological manipulation, employing distraction, misdirection, and sensory illusions to influence cognition and behavior. 3. Operational concealment, enhancing the effectiveness of field operatives by providing techniques to execute high-stakes interventions with minimal detection. Implementation and methods. MKULTRA's magician-inspired research involved collaboration with stage magicians, illusionists, and behavioral psychologists, integrating their methods into practical CIA applications. Key implementation aspects included sleight-of-hand training. Operatives were taught how to secretly introduce substances into beverages or objects without detection. This included microcapsules, powders, and liquids, often in combination with distraction techniques. Misdirection and attention control. Techniques were developed to focus a target's attention away from critical actions, facilitating the introduction of psychoactive agents or the observation of behavior without interference. Observation and manipulation techniques. Stagecraft principles were applied to create environments where subjects could be monitored covertly, including lighting, mirrors, and spatial arrangement to control perception. Integration with other MKULTRA projects. Safehouse trials, LSD testing, and hypnosis experiments were all augmented with magicians' tradecraft to increase operational success and reduce detection risk. Key experiments and findings. Research revealed several important insights into the applicability of magicians' techniques in behavioral control. 1. Enhanced covert administration. Techniques such as distraction, sleight of hand, and environmental control significantly improved the likelihood of successful surreptitious dosing, though unpredictability of subject reactions remained a challenge. 2. Psychological leverage. Misdirection and perceptual manipulation sometimes increased compliance or suggestibility in experimental subjects, particularly when combined with hypnosis or psychoactive drugs. 3. Limitations in high-risk scenarios. Field conditions introduced variables, unexpected observers, environmental changes, and individual resistance that reduced the reliability of magician-based techniques in operational contexts. 4. Human factors. Individual differences in attention, perception, and skepticism could drastically alter outcomes, highlighting the difficulty of universal behavioral control techniques. Ethical considerations and controversy. The ethical implications of applying magicians' tradecraft to human experimentation were significant. Non-consenting subjects. Many targets were unaware they were being manipulated or dosed, violating fundamental principles of informed consent. Psychological impact. Covert influence, particularly when combined with psychoactive substances, induced stress, confusion, and trauma in some participants. Secrecy and accountability. These experiments were conducted without oversight, creating high-risk environments for both subjects and operatives. While less lethal than chemical or biological projects, magician-inspired techniques represented an innovative yet ethically dubious avenue in MKULTRA's toolkit. Legacy and influence. This subproject had lasting influence both within intelligence operations and in the broader understanding of human perception and manipulation. 1. Operational methods. Many covert techniques developed for sleight-of-hand administration or perceptual manipulation informed later CIA field protocols. 2. Behavioral psychology insights. Experiments highlighted how attention, perception, and suggestion could be systematically exploited, influencing research in psychology, marketing, and interrogation. 3. Ethical cautionary tale. Public exposure of these experiments reinforced the need for ethical oversight, even in seemingly low-risk experimental designs. 4. Cultural impact. The fusion of stage magic with intelligence work contributed to a lasting mystique around MKULTRA, cementing its reputation as both scientifically sophisticated and morally questionable. Magicians, tradecraft, and surreptitious techniques. Origins and rationale. Despite limitations, EEG data helped refine dosing strategies, hypnotic protocols, and safehouse monitoring techniques, providing a scientific lens for previously anecdotal observations. Ethical considerations and controversy. As with other MKULTRA subprojects, EEG studies often involved non-consenting or vulnerable participants, including psychiatric patients and prisoners. Ethical issues included informed consent violations. Many subjects were unaware of electrode placement, drug administration, or the purpose of recordings. Psychological impact. EEG sessions, particularly when combined with hallucinogens, sensory deprivation, or hypnosis, sometimes caused stress, anxiety, or long-term trauma. One of the more unusual yet practical subprojects under MKULTRA was the study of magicians' techniques and their application to intelligence operations. the CIA recognized that illusion, misdirection, and sleight-of-hand methods, traditionally the domain of stage magicians, could be adapted to covertly administer drugs, manipulate perception, and control attention in field operations. This project stemmed from a core operational challenge. The agency needed techniques to influence or incapacitate targets without their awareness, often in public or semi-public settings. The rationale was multifaceted. Covert dosing, administering drugs surreptitiously through food, drinks, or physical contact. Psychological manipulation, employing distraction, misdirection, and sensory illusions to influence cognition and behavior. Operational concealment, enhancing the effectiveness of field operatives by providing techniques to execute high-stakes interventions with minimal detection. Implementation and methods. MKULTRA's magician-inspired research involved collaboration with stage magicians, illusionists, and behavioral psychologists, integrating their methods into practical CIA applications. Key implementation aspects included sleight-of-hand training. Operatives were taught how to secretly introduce substances into beverages or objects without detection. This included microcapsules, powders, and liquids, often in combination with distraction techniques. Misdirection and attention control. Techniques were developed to focus a target's attention away from critical actions, facilitating the introduction of psychoactive agents or the observation of behavior without interference. Observation and manipulation techniques. Stagecraft principles were applied to create environments where subjects could be monitored covertly, including lighting, mirrors, and spatial arrangement to control perception. Integration with other MKULTRA projects. Safe house trials, LSD testing, and hypnosis experiments were all augmented with magicians' tradecraft to increase operational success and reduce detection risk. Key experiments and findings. Research revealed several important insights into the applicability of magicians' techniques in behavioral control. Enhanced covert administration. Techniques such as distraction, sleight of hand, and environmental control significantly improved the likelihood of successful surreptitious dosing, though unpredictability of subject reactions remained a challenge. Psychological leverage. Misdirection and perceptual manipulation sometimes increased compliance or suggestibility in experimental subjects, particularly when combined with hypnosis or psychoactive drugs. Limitations in high-risk scenarios. Field conditions introduced variables, unexpected observers, environmental changes, and individual resistance that reduced the reliability of magician-based techniques in operational contexts. Human factors. Individual differences in attention, perception, and skepticism could drastically alter outcomes, highlighting the difficulty of universal behavioral control techniques. Ethical considerations and controversy. The ethical implications of applying magicians' tradecraft to human experimentation were significant. Non-consenting subjects. Many targets were unaware they were being manipulated or dosed, violating fundamental principles of informed consent. Psychological impact. Covert influence, particularly when combined with psychoactive substances, induced stress, confusion, and trauma in some participants. Secrecy and accountability. These experiments were conducted without oversight, creating high-risk environments for both subjects and operatives. While less lethal than chemical or biological projects, magician-inspired techniques represented an innovative yet ethically dubious avenue in MKULTRA's toolkit. Legacy and influence. This subproject had lasting influence both within intelligence operations and in the broader understanding of human perception and manipulation. Operational methods. Many covert techniques developed for sleight-of-hand administration or perceptual manipulation informed later CIA field protocols. Behavioral psychology insights. experiments highlighted how attention, perception, and suggestion could be systematically exploited, influencing research in psychology, marketing, and interrogation. Ethical cautionary tale. Public exposure of these experiments reinforced the need for ethical oversight, even in seemingly low-risk experimental designs. Cultural impact. The fusion of stage magic with intelligence work contributed to a lasting mystique around MKULTRA, cementing its reputation as both scientifically sophisticated and morally questionable. Sensory deprivation research. Origins and rationale. Sensory deprivation emerged as a major MKULTRA subproject in the 1950s, driven by a belief that removing normal sensory input could destabilize the mind, enhance suggestibility, or break down resistance. The CIA, inspired by reports of brainwashing during the Korean War and by experimental psychology studies, hypothesized that isolation, darkness, or monotony could 1. Increase compliance. By creating a state of mental disorientation, subjects might become more receptive to suggestions, hypnotic induction, or interrogation. 2. Induce psychological vulnerability. Extended deprivation could weaken cognitive control, amplify anxiety, or disrupt memory consolidation. 3. Enhance drug and hypnosis effects. Sensory deprivation could potentiate psychoactive substances or hypnotic suggestion, creating stronger or more consistent behavioral outcomes. The ultimate goal was to integrate sensory deprivation into behavioral manipulation protocols, combining environmental, chemical, and psychological tools for maximal operational effect. Implementation and methods. Sensory deprivation experiments were carried out in laboratory facilities, psychiatric hospitals, and specialized isolation chambers. The methods were carefully designed to control and monitor the participants' experience. Isolation tanks and chambers. Subjects were placed in dark, soundproof environments, sometimes filled with water flotation tanks, or air-conditioned rooms to remove tactile, visual, and auditory stimuli. Duration and intensity. Sessions ranged from several hours to days, with continuous observation to assess physical and psychological reactions. Integration with pharmacology. Some trials combined LSD, sedatives, or stimulants with deprivation to explore synergistic effects on cognition and emotional state. Behavioral and neurological monitoring. Subjects underwent observation for hallucinations, paranoia, memory lapses, and emotional instability, often accompanied by EEG or other physiological monitoring. Control and manipulation of stimuli. In addition to complete deprivation, experiments also used partial or intermittent sensory reduction, adjusting auditory, visual, or tactile inputs to test thresholds of perceptual disruption. Sensory deprivation studies yielded significant insights. 1. Rapid psychological disruption. Even short periods of deprivation often produced disorientation, heightened suggestibility, anxiety, and hallucinations, demonstrating the profound effect of environmental control on cognition. 2. Interaction with drugs. Subjects exposed to LSD or sedatives during sensory deprivation experienced exaggerated effects, including stronger hallucinations, emotional lability, or memory confusion. 3. Cognitive vulnerability. Prolonged isolation could impair memory, disrupt temporal perception, and increase dependency on external guidance, validating the CIA's theory that controlled environments could enhance operational control. 4. Individual variability. Responses varied widely. While some subjects were highly compliant or disoriented, others became agitated, paranoid, or violently resistant, underscoring the unpredictability of psychological manipulation. Ethical considerations and controversy. Sensory deprivation research under MKULTRA involved profound ethical issues. Non-consenting participants. Some subjects, including psychiatric patients and prisoners, were unaware of the nature or risks of the experiments. Psychological harm. Extended isolation often led to acute anxiety, hallucinations, and long-term cognitive effects, with some participants experiencing lasting trauma. Lack of oversight, deception, secrecy, and the absence of institutional review amplified ethical violations, highlighting MKUltra's disregard for human welfare. These experiments became a central example in later congressional investigations of MKUltra, demonstrating how environmental manipulation could be weaponized in combination with drugs and hypnosis. Legacy and influence. The sensory deprivation studies had lasting impact on both operational theory and scientific research. One, understanding cognitive vulnerability. The studies provided insight into how environmental factors affect cognition, emotion, and suggestibility, informing both intelligence operations and experimental psychology. 2, integration into broader behavioral manipulation protocols. Knowledge gained was applied to safe-house testing, interrogation strategies, and drug synergy experiments, forming a combined toolkit for MKUltra operatives. 3, ethical reforms. Public revelation of deprivation experiments helped establish mandatory informed consent, institutional review boards, IRBs, and stricter oversight for human research. 4, cultural legacy. Sensory deprivation experiments fueled fascination with brainwashing, mind control, and the limits of human endurance, influencing books, films, and popular culture depictions of MKUltra. Sleep deprivation and exhaustion studies. Origins and rationale. Sleep deprivation was a key area of MKUltra research due to its profound effects on cognitive function, emotional stability, and susceptibility to suggestion. Early Cold War intelligence reports suggested that prolonged wakefulness could weaken resistance, impair memory, and induce confusion, traits highly desirable for interrogation and behavioral manipulation. Sidney Gottlieb and his team sought to systematically study the psychological and physiological consequences of sleep deprivation, both alone and in combination with psychoactive drugs, hypnosis, or sensory deprivation. The rationale included: 1, enhanced suggestibility. Sleep-deprived subjects were hypothesized to be more compliant and responsive to instructions or suggestions. 2, operational utility. Understanding exhaustion effects could inform interrogation strategies, covert operations, and field applications. 3, synergy with other methods. Sleep deprivation could potentiate LSD, sedatives, hypnotic induction, and sensory deprivation, creating compounded psychological effects. Implementation and methods. Sleep deprivation experiments were conducted in controlled laboratory and hospital settings, and sometimes extended into safe-house or covert testing. Duration and scheduling. Subjects were kept awake for periods ranging from 24 hours to several days, with careful monitoring of physiological and psychological responses. Environmental control. Light, sound, and temperature were regulated to maintain wakefulness. Researchers sometimes used bright lights, forced activity, or auditory stimuli to prevent sleep. Integration with drugs. Stimulants, sedatives, or hallucinogens were administered to study how sleep deprivation modified drug response, often creating intense cognitive and emotional disruption. Behavioral observation. Subjects were assessed for attention, memory, judgment, compliance, and emotional stability. Cognitive tests, EEG recordings, and behavioral tasks were employed to quantify effects. Combined stressors. In some trials, sleep deprivation was combined with sensory deprivation, isolation, or hypnosis to explore maximal susceptibility states. Key findings and outcomes. Sleep deprivation research revealed several significant patterns. 1, rapid cognitive decline. Even 24-48 hours without sleep led to impaired memory, reduced attention, slowed reaction times, and difficulty with problem-solving. 2. Emotional instability. Subjects frequently exhibited irritability, anxiety, paranoia, and heightened emotional responsiveness, creating conditions favorable for behavioral influence. 3. Enhanced suggestibility. Sleep-deprived individuals were more responsive to hypnotic induction, verbal suggestion, and coercion, although results were highly individual-dependent. 4. Synergistic effects. Combining sleep deprivation with LSD, sedatives, or sensory deprivation produced exacerbated disorientation, hallucinations, and dissociation, providing the CIA with a deeper understanding of how multiple stressors could manipulate cognition. 5. Physical and psychological risks. Extended sleep deprivation caused severe fatigue, hallucinations, cognitive breakdown, and long-term psychological trauma, highlighting the dangerous nature of these experiments. Ethical considerations and controversy. Sleep deprivation studies raised profound ethical concerns. Non-consenting participants, many subjects, including psychiatric patients, prisoners, or civilians, were unaware of the experimental protocols. Severe physical and psychological harm. Extended wakefulness led to trauma, mental breakdowns, and potential long-term cognitive impairments. Secrecy and lack of oversight. Experiments were conducted without informed consent, institutional review, or medical safeguards, representing a clear violation of human rights and research ethics. These factors contributed to the widespread condemnation of MKULTRA once details were declassified in the 1970s. Legacy and influence. The legacy of sleep deprivation research in MKULTRA includes both operational and scientific insights. 1. Operational understanding. Data-informed interrogation techniques, safe house protocols, and behavioral manipulation strategies, showing the utility and limits of exploiting exhaustion. 2. Scientific contribution. The experiments provided early evidence on the cognitive, emotional, and physiological consequences of sleep loss, influencing later research in neuroscience, psychology, and human performance studies. 3. Policy and ethical reforms. Public awareness of sleep deprivation abuse contributed to the development of IRBs, mandatory informed consent, and stricter oversight of human experimentation. 4. Cultural impact. Sleep deprivation experiments reinforced the image of MKULTRA as an unethical, secretive, and psychologically sophisticated program, fueling public fascination with brainwashing and mind control. Psychiatric hospital experiments. Origins and rationale. Psychiatric hospitals and institutions became a central setting for MKULTRA experiments because they provided controlled access to vulnerable populations and allowed researchers to conduct intense studies on human behavior. The CIA sought to understand how psychiatric patients, often already mentally unstable, could be influenced or manipulated using psychoactive drugs, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and other techniques. The rationale for hospital-based experiments included: 1. Access to subjects. Hospitals offered a ready pool of patients, often with minimal ability to refuse participation. 2. Controlled environment. Clinical settings allowed researchers to monitor physiological and psychological responses continuously. 3. Integration of methods. Hospitals facilitated combining multiple MKULTRA techniques, including drug administration, sensory deprivation, hypnosis, and EEG monitoring. 4. Behavioral research. Understanding psychiatric conditions and vulnerabilities was believed to improve behavioral control methods for operational use. Implementation and methods. Experiments in psychiatric hospitals were extensive and varied, often conducted under the guise of legitimate medical research. Drug administration. Patients received LSD, barbiturates, amphetamines, and experimental compounds, frequently without informed consent. Hypnosis and psychic driving. Patients were subjected to repeated verbal messages via tape loops or live sessions, intended to reshape memory, personality, or behavior. Sensory manipulation, isolation, controlled lighting, and noise deprivation were used to test effects on cognition, perception, and compliance. Electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, augmentation. In some cases, ECT was combined with drugs or hypnosis to study effects on memory erasure, suggestibility, and emotional response. Longitudinal monitoring, patients, physiological and psychological responses were continuously observed and recorded to evaluate short and long-term effects. Key findings and outcomes. Hospital experiments provided some of the most detailed data on human response to MKULTRA techniques. 1. Extreme suggestibility. Vulnerable psychiatric patients often exhibited enhanced responsiveness to hypnotic suggestion, verbal conditioning, and drug influence. 2. Memory and personality effects. Techniques like psychic driving sometimes produced partial memory disruption or altered emotional responses, though results were inconsistent. 3. Compounded psychological impact. Combining drugs, hypnosis, and sensory deprivation caused severe disorientation, trauma, and in some cases permanent cognitive or emotional damage. 4. Operational lessons. Hospital-based research informed later field applications, demonstrating how controlled environments could maximize behavioral manipulation while minimizing immediate detection. Ethical considerations and controversy. Psychiatric hospital experiments represent some of the most ethically egregious aspects of MKULTRA. Lack of informed consent. Many patients were involuntarily involved, with no understanding of risks. Severe and lasting harm. Numerous subjects experienced psychological trauma, memory loss, and permanent impairment. Medical complicity and secrecy. Some psychiatrists participated knowingly, while others were misled about the true purpose, creating an ethical dilemma about professional responsibility. Legal and moral violation. These experiments violated both contemporary medical ethics and legal protections, highlighting MKULTRA's prioritization of intelligence goals over human welfare. Legacy and influence. The psychiatric hospital experiments had enduring consequences. 1. Advancement in behavioral research. The data contributed to understanding drug effects, hypnotic susceptibility, and environmental manipulation, though obtained unethically. 2. Operational framework. Hospitals demonstrated how controlled institutional settings could be leveraged for psychological experimentation, informing both CIA operations and later ethical debates. 3. Ethical reform and oversight. Revelations fueled creation of institutional review boards, IRBs, mandatory informed consent protocols, and stricter guidelines for research involving vulnerable populations. 4. Cultural and historical impact. Public awareness of hospital experiments contributed to the perception of MKULTRA as a morally compromised, secretive program, influencing literature, films, and investigative journalism. Between 1957 and 1964, the CIA conducted a series of controversial experiments at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, Canada, as part of MKULTRA Subproject 68. These experiments were led by Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron, a prominent Scottish psychiatrist and former president of the American Psychiatric Association. Cameron aimed to develop methods for psychic driving, which involved erasing and reprogramming patients' memories to treat mental illnesses such as schizophrenia. The rationale behind these experiments was to explore techniques that could potentially be used for mind control, interrogation, and behavioral modification. The CIA was interested in understanding how various methods, including drug-induced sleep, intensive electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, sensory deprivation, and the administration of antipsychotic drugs like thorazine, could alter an individual's mental state and behavior. The experiments were conducted under the guise of legitimate medical treatment, with patients often unaware of the true nature of the procedures. Subjects were typically women who had been diagnosed with conditions such as depression or anxiety. They were subjected to prolonged periods of drug-induced sleep, sometimes lasting up to 65 days, during which they received high doses of barbiturates and other sedatives. In addition to drug-induced sleep, patients underwent intensive ECT sessions, sometimes administered multiple times a day. These treatments were intended to disrupt existing memories and facilitate the implantation of new ones. Sensory deprivation techniques were also employed, including isolation in dark, soundproof rooms, to further disorient patients and enhance suggestibility. The administration of thorazine, an antipsychotic drug, was used to induce a state of mental confusion and compliance. Patients were often subjected to these combined treatments for extended periods, leading to significant psychological and physical harm. The experiments conducted at the Allen Memorial Institute had profound and lasting effects on the subjects involved. Many patients experienced severe memory loss, personality changes, and emotional instability. Some individuals were left with permanent cognitive impairments, rendering them unable to perform basic daily tasks. The combination of drug-induced sleep, ECT, sensory deprivation, and antipsychotic medication proved to be highly effective in altering patients' mental states. However, the ethical implications of these methods were grave, as they violated fundamental principles of medical ethics and human rights. Ethical considerations conducted at the Allen Memorial Institute have been widely condemned for their unethical nature. Patients were not informed of the true purpose of the treatments and did not provide informed consent. The procedures caused significant harm, including long-term psychological trauma and physical side effects. In the aftermath of these revelations, the Canadian government and the McGill University Health Centre, which now oversees the Allen Memorial Institute's legacy, have faced criticism for their roles in permitting and conducting these experiments. The lack of oversight and accountability has raised serious questions about the protection of vulnerable individuals in medical research settings. Legacy and influence. The experiments at the Allen Memorial Institute have had a lasting impact on both the field of psychiatry and public perception of governmental research ethics. The exposure of these practices led to significant changes in research protocols, including stricter regulations regarding informed consent and the treatment of human subjects. In popular culture, the story of the MKULTRA experiments has been depicted in various media, highlighting the dangers of unchecked governmental power and the importance of ethical standards in scientific research. Hypnosis and suggestion studies. Origins and rationale. In the early 1950s, the CIA initiated Project Bluebird, which evolved into MKULTRA, to explore methods of mind control and behavioral modification. Hypnosis was identified as a potential tool for creating Manchurian candidate-style agents who could be manipulated without their knowledge. The CIA's interest was fueled by Cold War anxieties and reports of Soviet and Chinese use of mind control techniques on U.S. prisoners of war during the Korean War. Implementation and methods. The CIA conducted various experiments to assess the effectiveness of hypnosis in controlling behavior. Post-hypnotic suggestion. Subjects were hypnotized and given commands to perform certain actions or recall information at a later time. Drug-assisted hypnosis. Substances like LSD were administered to subjects to enhance the susceptibility to hypnosis. Behavioral conditioning. Hypnosis was used in conjunction with other techniques to alter subjects' behaviors and responses. These experiments were often conducted without the subject's informed consent, raising significant ethical concerns. Key findings and outcomes. The hypnosis studies yielded several notable outcomes. Enhanced suggestibility. Hypnosis increased subjects' susceptibility to suggestions, allowing for more profound behavioral changes. Potential for covert operations. The ability to implant suggestions covertly opened possibilities for espionage and covert actions. Limitations in control. Despite initial optimism, the extent of control achievable through hypnosis was limited and inconsistent. These findings contributed to the broader understanding of human behavior and the potential applications of hypnosis in intelligence operations. Ethical considerations and controversy. The hypnosis experiments were conducted without proper ethical oversight. Lack of informed consent. Many subjects were unaware they were part of an experiment, violating ethical research standards. Psychological harm. Some subjects experienced psychological distress and long-term effects from the experiments. Secrecy and accountability. The classified nature of the experiments prevented public scrutiny and accountability. These ethical breaches led to public outrage and calls for greater oversight of government research programs. Legacy and influence. The hypnosis studies left a complex legacy. Advancements in behavioral science. The research contributed to the field of behavioral science, particularly in understanding the power of suggestion. Ethical reforms. The revelations of unethical practices led to reforms in research ethics, including the establishment of institutional review boards, IRBs. Cultural impact. The concept of mind control through hypnosis became a popular theme in literature and media, influencing public perceptions of government research programs. While the hypnosis studies were ultimately deemed failures in achieving their intended goals, they played a significant role in shaping the discourse around ethics in research and the potential for psychological manipulation. ESP and paranormal studies, Subproject 136. Origins and rationale. In 1961, the CIA initiated Subproject 136 under MKULTRA to explore the potential use of extrasensory perception, ESP, and other paranormal phenomena for intelligence purposes. This interest was partly inspired by Cold War fears of Soviet advancements in psychological warfare. The project aimed to investigate whether techniques like telepathy and remote viewing could be harnessed for espionage and covert operations. Implementation and methods. The CIA contracted researchers such as Dr. Joseph B. Rhine, a pioneer in parapsychology at Duke University, to conduct experiments on ESP. These studies involved testing subjects' abilities to perceive information beyond the known human senses, using methods like card guessing and remote viewing sessions. The research was conducted in collaboration with institutions including Harvard University, Stanford University, and the University of Chicago. Key findings and outcomes. The experiments yielded mixed results. While some subjects demonstrated occasional successes, the overall evidence for reliable ESP was inconclusive. However, the CIA continued to fund such research, reflecting ongoing interest in the potential applications of paranormal phenomena for intelligence gathering. Ethical considerations and controversy. The ethical implications of these studies were significant. Subjects were often unaware of the true nature of the experiments, raising concerns about informed consent and the potential for psychological harm. Additionally, the use of public funds for research into paranormal phenomena sparked debates about the allocation of resources and the credibility of such studies. Legacy and influence. Despite the inconclusive results, Subproject 136 contributed to the broader field of parapsychology and influenced subsequent research into psychic phenomena. The project's existence has been a subject of public interest and has been referenced in discussions about government-funded research into unconventional studies. Subprojects 40, 74. Origins and rationale. Subprojects 40 and 74 were initiated to investigate the potential for manipulating addiction and withdrawal processes as a means of controlling individuals. The CIA sought to understand how substances like morphine and heroin could be used to induce compliance or break resistance during interrogations. Implementation and methods. These studies involved administering addictive substances to subjects and observing the effects of withdrawal. The research was conducted in various settings, including hospitals and medical facilities, with the aim of developing methods to exploit addiction for intelligence purposes. Key findings and outcomes. The experiments revealed that addiction could be induced and managed, but the ethical and practical implications of such methods were profound. The studies highlighted the potential for addiction to be used as a tool for manipulation, raising significant concerns about human rights and the morality of such practices. Ethical considerations and controversy. The ethical issues surrounding these experiments were significant. Subjects were often unaware of the true nature of the studies, and the potential for harm was considerable. The use of addictive substances without informed consent led to public outrage and calls for greater oversight of government research programs. Legacy and influence. The addiction studies have been cited in discussions about the ethics of government-funded research and the potential for abuse in intelligence operations. The revelations of these experiments contributed to reforms in research ethics and increased scrutiny of government research programs. Biological capture and delivery devices, subprojects 15-19. Origins and rationale. Subprojects 15 and 19 were developed to create biological agents and delivery systems for covert operations. The CIA sought to develop methods for incapacitating or neutralizing targets without detection, using substances that could be administered covertly. Implementation and methods. The research focused on developing aerosol sprays, food and drink adulterants, and concealed dosing devices. These technologies were intended for use in operations where traditional methods of incapacitation were not feasible. Key findings and outcomes. The development of these devices raised significant ethical and legal concerns. The potential for misuse and the lack of oversight led to debates about the morality of such research and its implications for international law. Ethical considerations and controversy. The ethical issues surrounding these subprojects were profound. The development of biological agents for covert operations without informed consent or oversight posed significant risks to public health and safety. The lack of transparency and accountability led to public outcry and calls for greater regulation of biological research. Legacy and influence. The revelations of these subprojects have influenced discussions about the ethics of biological research and the potential for abuse in covert operations. The exposure of these programs contributed to reforms in research ethics and increased oversight of government-funded scientific research. Mind-altering plant compounds, subprojects 1, 22, 25. Origins and rationale. Subprojects 1, 22, and 25 were initiated to explore the effects of mind-altering plant compounds for potential use in intelligence operations. The CIA aimed to identify substances that could alter consciousness and behavior, facilitating interrogation and manipulation. Implementation and methods. The research involved sourcing and testing obscure psychoactive plants, including ololeuque seeds, mescaline, and psilocybin. These substances were administered to subjects in controlled settings to observe their effects on perception and behavior. Key findings and outcomes. The experiments revealed that certain plant compounds could induce altered states of consciousness, but the variability and unpredictability of these effects limited their practical applications. The studies highlighted the challenges of using such substances for intelligence purposes. Ethical considerations and controversy. The ethical issues surrounding these experiments were significant. Subjects were often unaware of the true nature of the studies, and the potential for psychological harm was considerable. The lack of informed consent and the potential for abuse led to public criticism and calls for greater oversight of government research programs. Legacy and influence. The revelations of these experiments have influenced discussions about the ethics of using psychoactive substances in research and the potential for abuse in intelligence operations. The exposure of these programs contributed to reforms in research ethics and increased scrutiny of government-funded scientific research. Clinical and psychiatric applications, subprojects 23, 43, 102. Origins and rationale. Subprojects 23, 43, and 102 were developed to investigate the use of clinical and psychiatric methods for behavioral modification. The CIA sought to understand how psychological techniques could be employed to alter behavior and extract information. Implementation and methods. The research involved universities and hospitals conducting controlled experiments using substances like LSD and techniques such as hypnosis. These studies were often conducted without the informed consent of the subjects, raising significant ethical concerns. Key findings and outcomes. The experiments demonstrated that certain psychological techniques could alter behavior, but the ethical implications and the potential for misuse were profound. The studies highlighted the need for ethical guidelines and oversight in psychological research. Ethical considerations and controversy. The ethical issues surrounding these subprojects were significant. The lack of informed consent and the potential for psychological harm led to public outrage and calls for greater oversight of government research programs. Legacy and influence. The revelations of these experiments have influenced discussions about the ethics of psychological research and the potential for abuse in intelligence operations. The exposure of these programs contributed to reforms in research ethics and increased scrutiny of government-funded scientific training. Research. Subproject 18. Origins and rationale. Subproject 18 was initiated to develop training materials for untrained observers, such as prostitutes or handlers, to record the behavior of drugged subjects. The CIA sought to understand how individuals under the influence of substances like LSD would behave in controlled environments. Implementation and methods. The research involved creating manuals and guidelines for observers to document the behavior of subjects in safe house settings. These studies were conducted to gather data on the effects of substances on behavior and to inform future operations. Key findings and outcomes. The experiments provided insights into the behavioral effects of substances like LSD, but the ethical implications and the potential for misuse were significant. The studies highlighted the need for ethical guidelines and oversight in behavioral research. Ethical considerations and controversy. The ethical issues surrounding this subproject were significant. The use of untrained observers and the potential for exploitation of subjects raised concerns about informed consent and the morality of such research. Legacy and influence. The revelations of this subproject have influenced discussions about the ethics of behavioral research and the potential for abuse in intelligence operations. The exposure of these programs contributed to reforms in research ethics and increased scrutiny of government-funded scientific research. Parapsychology and brainwashing myths, subprojects 142, 146. Origins and rationale. In the early 1960s, the CIA initiated subprojects 142 and 146 under the MKULTRA program to investigate the feasibility of brainwashing and mind control techniques. These subprojects were motivated by Cold War fears of Soviet and Chinese advancements in psychological manipulation, particularly concerning the treatment of U.S. prisoners of war during the Korean War. The CIA sought to develop methods to counteract or replicate these techniques for intelligence purposes. Implementation and methods. Subproject 142 focused on the study of parapsychology, including extrasensory perception, ESP, and telepathy, to assess their potential applications in intelligence operations. Research was conducted at various institutions, including Duke University, under the direction of Dr. Joseph B. Rhine, a pioneer in parapsychology. Experiments involved testing subjects' abilities to perceive information beyond the known human senses, using methods like card guessing and remote viewing sessions. Subproject 146, on the other hand, concentrated on the study of brainwashing techniques and their potential for use in intelligence operations. The CIA examined various methods, including hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and drug-induced states, to determine their effectiveness in altering individuals' behavior and extracting information. Key findings and outcomes. The experiments yielded mixed results. While some subjects demonstrated occasional successes in ESP tasks, the overall evidence for reliable extrasensory perception was inconclusive. Similarly, the study of brainwashing techniques revealed that while certain methods could induce temporary changes in behavior, the long-term effectiveness and ethical implications of such techniques were questionable. Ethical considerations and controversy. The ethical implications of these studies were significant. Subjects were often unaware of the true nature of the experiments, raising concerns about informed consent and the potential for psychological harm. Additionally, the use of public funds for research into paranormal phenomena and mind control techniques sparked debates about the allocation of resources and the credibility of such studies. Legacy and influence. Despite the inconclusive results, subprojects 142 and 146 contributed to the broader field of parapsychology and the study of psychological manipulation. The projects have been subjects of public interest and have been referenced in discussions about government-funded research into unconventional topics. The exposure of these programs has led to increased scrutiny of government research practices and has influenced discussions about the ethics of psychological experimentation. Key figures and victims. Sidney Gottlieb, the Black Sorcerer. The center of MKULTRA was Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the CIA chemist who personally approved many of the program's most controversial experiments. Gottlieb was a paradoxical figure, a brilliant scientist who lived simply, practiced meditation, and raised goats on a farm, yet also orchestrated experiments that inflicted suffering on countless individuals. His fascination with mind control led him to distribute LSD widely, often with little concern for safety or consent. Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the CIA's poisoner-in-chief. Early life and education. Sidney Gottlieb was born on August 3, 1918, in the Bronx, New York, to Jewish immigrant parents from Hungary. As a child, he faced physical challenges, including wearing leg braces for club feet and dealing with a stutter, which led to bullying. Despite these obstacles, he excelled academically, graduating from James Monroe High School. He pursued higher education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, earning a bachelor's degree in chemistry. Gottlieb then obtained a PhD in biochemistry from the California Institute of Technology in 1943. His early research focused on organic soils and drug testing, laying the groundwork for his future work in chemical sciences. Government career and MKUltra. In July 1951, Gottlieb joined the CIA, recruited by Deputy Director Alan Dulles. He was appointed head of the chemical division within the technical services staff, tasked with researching chemical and biological agents for intelligence purposes. His first significant project was Project Bluebird, which aimed to develop methods for mind control and interrogation. This project evolved into Project Artichoke and eventually MKUltra. Under MKUltra, Gottlieb directed numerous experiments involving LSD and other psychoactive substances, often without the subject's consent. These experiments were conducted in various settings, including hospitals, universities, and CIA safe houses. One of the most notorious aspects of MKUltra was the use of unwitting individuals in these studies, leading to significant ethical and legal controversies. Controversial activities. Beyond his work with MKUltra, Gottlieb was involved in covert operations aimed at undermining foreign leaders. He developed plans to assassinate figures such as Fidel Castro, including schemes involving poisoned cigars and contaminated wetsuits. He also played a role in the CIA's attempt to assassinate Congolese Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba, providing poison intended for use on Lumumba's toothbrush. Gottlieb's involvement in these operations highlighted the extent of the CIA's clandestine activities during the Cold War and raised questions about the agency's accountability and later life. Oversight. After retiring from the CIA in 1973, Gottlieb largely withdrew from the public eye. In the 1980s, he was deposed in legal proceedings related to MKUltra, where he acknowledged his role in the program but expressed regret for the harm caused. In his later years, Gottlieb sought to make amends for his past actions. He earned a master's degree in speech therapy from San Jose State University and worked as a speech-language pathologist in Maryland for over a decade, helping individuals with speech disorders. Legacy and public perception. Gottlieb's legacy is marked by the ethical and legal implications of his actions. While he was a pioneering chemist, his involvement in MKUltra and other covert operations has overshadowed his scientific achievements. The revelations about his work have led to ongoing debates about government transparency, the limits of scientific experimentation, and the protection of individual rights. In 1999, Gottlieb passed away at the age of 80. His life and work continue to be subjects of study and discussion, serving as a cautionary tale about the potential abuses of power in the name of national security. Ewan Cameron and psychic driving. One of MKUltra's most disturbing sub-projects was conducted by psychiatrist Dr. Ewan Cameron at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal. With CIA funding, Cameron subjected patients to extreme depatterning techniques, heavy doses of electroshock therapy, drug-induced comas lasting weeks, and repeated taped messages in an attempt to erase and reprogram their personalities. Many patients suffered permanent psychological damage. Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron, architect of the Montreal experiments. Early life and education. Donald Ewan Cameron was born on December 24, 1901, in Bridge of Allen, Stirlingshire, Scotland. He graduated from the University of Glasgow in 1924 and began his medical career as a resident surgeon at Glasgow Infirmary. In 1929, he moved to Canada to work at the Brandon Mental Hospital in Manitoba. By 1943, Cameron had founded the psychiatry department at McGill University in Montreal, where he served as its first chair. He was also a member of the Nuremberg Medical Tribunal in 1946-1947, assessing the mental fitness of Nazi officials for trial. Professional achievements. Cameron held prominent positions in the psychiatric community, serving as president of the American Psychiatric Association, 1952-1953, the Canadian Psychiatric Association, 1958-1959, the American Psychopathological Association, 1963, the Society of Biological Psychiatry, 1965, and the World Psychiatric Association, 1961-1966. His leadership in these organizations underscored his influence in the field of psychiatry. The Montreal experiments and MKUltra. Between 1957 and 1964, Cameron conducted a series of experiments at the Allen Memorial Institute, officially known as MKUltra Subproject 68. These experiments aimed to treat schizophrenia by altering patients' memories and behaviors through methods such as psychic driving, drug-induced sleep, intensive electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, sensory deprivation, and the administration of the antipsychotic drug thorazine. Patients were often subjected to these procedures without informed consent, leading to significant ethical concerns. The CIA funded these experiments indirectly through a front organization, the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology, and Cameron was unaware that the funding originated from the CIA. He received $69,000 between 1957 and 1964, equivalent to approximately $767,000 in 2024 dollars, to carry out these experiments. Methods and impact. Cameron's methods included placing patients in drug-induced comas for extended periods, administering high doses of ECT, and using sensory deprivation techniques. The psychic driving technique involved playing repetitive recorded messages to patients for up to 16-20 hours a day, sometimes for weeks at a time. These procedures often resulted in patients experiencing memory loss, personality changes, and other long-term psychological effects. Ethical controversies and legacy. The ethical implications of Cameron's experiments have been widely criticized. Victims of these experiments reported lasting psychological and physical harm, including memory loss, inability to speak, and loss of personal identity. In 1977, the U.S. Senate conducted hearings on the MKULTRA program, bringing public attention to the abuses carried out under Cameron's direction. While Cameron was never criminally charged, his involvement in these experiments has left a lasting stain on his professional legacy. Death and posthumous recognition. Donald Ewan Cameron died on September 8, 1967, in Lake Placid, New York. In the years following his death, his role in the MKUltra program became a subject of public scrutiny and academic study. The exposure of his experiments has led to ongoing debates about medical ethics, informed consent, and the accountability of scientific research. George Hunter White and Midnight Climax. Another colorful figure was George Hunter White, a narcotics agent who ran the Operation Midnight Climax safe houses. White orchestrated experiments in which men were secretly dosed with LSD by sex workers, all while being observed behind hidden mirrors. White later wrote gleefully about his work, reflecting a cavalier disregard for the rights of his subjects. Early life and career. George Hunter White was born on June 22, 1908, in Los Angeles, California. He graduated from Oregon State College and began his career as a federal narcotics agent with the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, FBN, in 1937. White's early work involved undercover operations against narcotics trafficking and organized crime, earning him a reputation as a tenacious and effective agent. World War II and OSS service. During World War II, White served as a colonel in the U.S. Army and was assigned to the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the precursor to the CIA. He was stationed in India and trained Allied operatives in counterintelligence and sabotage techniques. White was also involved in the OSS's X-2 counterintelligence division, where he gained experience in covert operations and psychological manipulation. Involvement in MKUltra and Operation Midnight Climax. In the 1950s, White's career took a controversial turn when he was recruited by the CIA to oversee a series of experiments under the MKUltra program. Specifically, he managed Operation Midnight Climax, a subproject that aimed to study the effects of LSD and other substances on human behavior. White established safe houses in San Francisco and New York City, where he employed prostitutes to lure unsuspecting men into the apartments. These individuals were secretly dosed with LSD, and their behavior was observed through two-way mirrors and hidden recording devices. The goal was to gather intelligence on the effects of mind-altering substances and to explore potential interrogation techniques. Throughout these operations, White maintained a detached and often cavalier attitude. In his personal diaries, he referred to his work as fun, 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 expressing a sense of enjoyment in the manipulation and observation of his subjects. Later life and legacy. White continued his work with the CIA until the early 1960s. In 1963, the CIA's Inspector General discovered the extent of the Midnight Climax experiments and ordered their cessation. White retired from federal service in 1965. He passed away on October 23, 1975, in San Francisco, California. Despite his significant role in one of the most infamous covert operations in U.S. history, White's actions were largely unpunished, and he remains a controversial figure in discussions about government ethics and the tragedies of power. Among the many victims of MKUltra, the case of Frank Olson stands out. A U.S. Army scientist, Olson was unknowingly dosed with LSD at a CIA retreat in 1953. In the days that followed, he became increasingly unstable, expressing doubts about his work in chemical warfare. Shortly afterward, he fell from a hotel window in New York City. Though initially ruled a suicide, later evidence suggested Olson may have been murdered to prevent him from revealing classified information. Other victims included prisoners who volunteered for drug trials in exchange for reduced sentences, psychiatric patients subjected to untested therapies, and civilians caught in the CIA's web of experimentation. For many, the damage was lifelong. Exposure, investigations, and cover-ups. For 2 decades, MKUltra remained hidden from the public, protected by classification and compartmentalization. But in the 1970s, amid growing distrust of government following the Vietnam War and the Watergate scandal, cracks began to appear. In 1973, as Watergate investigations loomed, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of MKUltra files to protect the agency. Thousands of documents were shredded, erasing much of the program's history. Nonetheless, some files survived by oversight, and testimonies from former participants helped piece together the story. The first official exposure came with the Rockefeller Commission in 1975, followed by the Senate's Church Committee investigation into intelligence abuses. Hearings revealed shocking details about unwitting drug experiments, prompting public outrage. In 1977, a Freedom of Information Act request uncovered 20,000 surviving documents related to MKUltra. These revelations led to further Senate hearings, during which Sidney Gottlieb and other officials testified. Gottlieb admitted involvement, but claimed poor memory of specifics. No senior officials were prosecuted, and many victims received little or no compensation. The CIA defended its actions as a product of Cold War necessity, but critics saw MKUltra as a profound betrayal of democratic principles. The destruction of records ensured that the full extent of the program will likely never be known, and neither will associated programs like the Phoenix program. The Phoenix program was deeply tied to CIA operations in Vietnam, and many historians see it as an operational cousin to MKUltra. Both used psychological manipulation, coercion, and ethically dubious tactics under the justification of national security. While MKUltra focused on behavioral research and covert experimentation, the CIA's ambitions for psychological and population control extended far beyond the laboratory. During the Vietnam War, these ideas found a brutal operational application in the Phoenix program, 1967–1972, a joint CIA-US military, South Vietnamese initiative aimed at dismantling the Viet Cong insurgency through intelligence, interrogation, and targeted elimination. Origins of the Phoenix program. The Vietnam War presented the U.S. with a unique challenge, fighting not only a conventional military opponent, but also a decentralized guerrilla insurgency deeply embedded within rural populations. Traditional military operations were often ineffective against such tactics. To address this, the CIA developed the Phoenix program, known in Vietnamese as Phung Hong. Its purpose was to identify, neutralize, and eliminate the Viet Cong infrastructure, VCI, the political, logistical, and intelligence networks that sustained the insurgency. The strategy emphasized intelligence gathering, psychological warfare, and population control. Phoenix drew upon lessons from earlier counterinsurgency campaigns in Malaya and the Philippines, but it also reflected the CIA's growing expertise in psychological operations, interrogation, and covert action. areas directly influenced by MK-Ultra-era thinking. Methods and operations. The Phoenix program employed a range of tactics, many of which remain controversial. Interrogation centers. Suspected Viet Cong were detained in special centers where they faced coercive interrogation, often involving torture, psychological manipulation, and, according to some reports, the use of drugs. These methods echoed MK-Ultra's earlier experiments in breaking down resistance and manipulating memory. Targeted assassinations. Phoenix maintained blacklists of suspected Viet Cong operatives. Teams of South Vietnamese and American operatives carried out raids and assassinations, eliminating thousands of individuals. While officially described as neutralizations, these often amounted to extrajudicial killings. Psychological warfare. Beyond killings, Phoenix sought to spread fear within rural communities. The unpredictability of arrests and assassinations created an atmosphere of terror intended to erode Viet Cong influence. Mass surveillance and informant networks. Villages were subjected to constant monitoring, with local informants recruited to identify suspected insurgents. This system of surveillance and betrayal created deep social fractures. Controversies and criticism. Estimates vary, but between 20,000 and 40,000 people were killed under Phoenix, with tens of thousands more detained or tortured. Critics argue that many victims were not Viet Cong operatives, but civilians caught up in faulty intelligence, personal vendettas, or indiscriminate sweeps. Reports from whistleblowers and journalists, including Douglas Valentine's landmark book The Phoenix Program, exposed widespread abuses: torture with electricity, mock executions, waterboarding, and psychological torment. These revelations shocked the American public and fueled opposition to the Vietnam War. Links to MK-Ultra. Although Phoenix and MK-Ultra were distinct programs, they shared philosophical and operational DNA. Interrogation techniques. Many methods used in Phoenix drew on behavioral research conducted under MK-Ultra and related CIA projects. Sleep deprivation, sensory manipulation, and drug use were reportedly applied in interrogation centers. Psychological control. Both programs sought not only to extract information, but also to shape behavior through fear, coercion, and the breakdown of individual will. Ethical violations. Like MK-Ultra, Phoenix operated outside the bounds of international law and human rights, justified by Cold War imperatives. In this sense, Phoenix can be seen as the real-world application of MK-Ultra's laboratory theories. Where MK-Ultra experimented on the individual mind, Phoenix deployed psychological and coercive tactics on a population scale. Legacy of the Phoenix Program. The Phoenix Program officially ended in 1972, but its legacy endured. To supporters, it was a necessary counterinsurgency tool that weakened the Viet Cong's infrastructure. To critics, it was a campaign of terror and repression that undermined America's moral standing and contributed to the eventual loss of the war. For intelligence professionals, Phoenix provided a blueprint for later counterinsurgency and counterterrorism strategies. Elements of Phoenix reappeared in U.S. operations in Latin America during the 1980s, and even in counterterrorism efforts after 9/11, where targeted killings, interrogation centers, and psychological warfare once again became tools of policy. In many ways, Phoenix was the bridge between MK-Ultra's shadowy experiments and the large-scale psychological and counterinsurgency operations of the late 20th century. Both programs reflected the CIA's belief that controlling minds, whether of individuals or populations, was as vital, controversial, and disturbing extensions of the MK-Ultra Phoenix conversation. The alleged links between CIA counterinsurgency programs, psychological conditioning, and the rise of American serial killers, as argued in works like David McGowan's Program to Kill. While highly debated and not universally accepted by scholars, it's an important thread to cover if we're tracing MK-Ultra's broader legacy and speculative cultural impact. The Phoenix Program and the serial killer connection. While the Phoenix Program is historically documented as a counterinsurgency operation in Vietnam, some researchers and authors have suggested that its tactics and the mindset it represented bled into American society in darker and more unexpected ways. In particular, David McGowan's provocative book, Programmed to Kill: The Politics of Serial Murder, argues that the wave of serial killers in the United States during the 1970s and 1980s may have roots in covert operations, including Phoenix and MKULTRA. The serial killer epidemic. From the late 1960s through the 1980s, the United States experienced what appeared to be an unprecedented rise in serial killings. Figures such as Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, David Berkowitz, son of Sam, and Henry Lee Lucas became infamous household names. The phenomenon was so prominent that the FBI created specialized behavioral analysis units to track and understand serial murder. To many, this surge reflected social changes, post-war alienation, urban decay, the failures of mental health systems. But authors like McGowan proposed a more sinister backdrop, that at least some of these killers were connected, directly or indirectly, to government experiments in psychological control. Phoenix Program methods at home. The Phoenix Program's interrogation and conditioning methods involved breaking down individuals through trauma, sensory manipulation, and drugs. McGowan and others suggest that these techniques were repurposed domestically, either deliberately or through the reintroduction of traumatized operatives into American society. Some threads of this theory include traumatized veterans. Many Phoenix operatives returned from Vietnam deeply scarred by their participation in torture and assassination. Some veterans struggled with violent urges and dissociation, potentially fueling acts of violence once back home. Behavioral conditioning. If MKUltra explored whether individuals could be programmed to commit acts against their will, Phoenix demonstrated the operational use of terror, dehumanization, and psychological control. McGowan speculates that elements of this conditioning were later tested or deployed domestically. Institutional overlap. Several high-profile killers had suspicious ties to military or intelligence institutions. For example, Henry Lee Lucas made claims of being part of a larger network of contract killings. David Berkowitz hinted at cult connections. Though much of this remains unproven, it has fueled conspiracy narratives linking serial murder to covert operations. Programmed killers. Programmed to Kill suggests that some serial killers may have functioned as lone wolf, assassins, or psychological weapons, their acts sowing fear and destabilization at home. In this reading, the serial killer epidemic wasn't a random social phenomenon, but a continuation of psychological warfare experiments first pioneered abroad. Examples cited include David Berkowitz, son of Sam. While officially a lone gunman, Berkowitz hinted at involvement in a larger cult-like group, leading some to speculate about mind control influences. Henry Lee Lucas. Lucas claimed, though often unreliably, to have been involved in a nationwide killing network, raising questions about whether he was manipulated or used by others. Charles Manson. Though not a serial killer in the strict sense, Manson's connection to LSD distribution networks, his experiments in mind control, and alleged contact with researchers linked to government programs have long raised suspicions. Criticism and debate. Mainstream historians and criminologists generally reject these theories, attributing the rise of serial killing to social and cultural factors. They argue that McGowan's thesis relies heavily on circumstantial evidence and speculative connections. However, even critics acknowledge that MKUltra and Phoenix created a climate in which human experimentation, trauma-based conditioning, and psychological warfare were normalized. The overlap of timelines, MKUltra's peak in the 1950s-60s, Phoenix in the late 1960s, early 70s, and the explosion of serial killers in the 70s-80s, remains provocative. The symbolic connection. Whether or not direct links exist, the connection between Phoenix and serial killers is symbolically powerful. Both represent the extreme dehumanization of individuals. Phoenix weaponized terror on a mass scale, while serial killers embodied terror in a personal, intimate form. Both emerged from the same historical milieu, a United States grappling with violence abroad, disillusionment at home, and the dark potential of psychological science. A dark legacy. The Phoenix serial killer connection remains one of the most controversial and speculative aspects of the MKUltra story. Even if McGowan's thesis cannot be conclusively proven, it reflects the enduring suspicion that government experimentation left long shadows across American society. The rise of serial killers may have been coincidental, but for many, the possibility that they were products of hidden programs underscores the distrust seeded by MKUltra and Phoenix. The psychedelic enclave and MKUltra's shadow. The birth of a countercultural enclave. In the mid-1960s, Laurel Canyon, nestled in the Hollywood Hills above Los Angeles, became a haven for musicians and artists. Figures like Joni Mitchell, Jim Morrison, Frank Zappa, and members of the Byrds, Crosby, Stills and Nash, and the Mamas and the Papas found residence in this secluded neighborhood. The area's rustic charm and proximity to the entertainment industry made it an ideal sanctuary for creative expression. However, beneath this artistic renaissance, Laurel Canyon's history intertwines with covert military and intelligence operations. The Lookout Mountain Air Force Station, located within the canyon, was a Cold War-era facility used for testing and filming military equipment. This connection has led to speculation about the neighborhood's role in broader societal control mechanisms. The Lookout Mountain Air Force Station, a hub of military influence. Established in 1941, the Lookout Mountain Air Force Station served as a secret film studio for the U.S. Department of Defense and the Atomic Energy Commission from 1947 to 1969. The facility produced motion pictures and still photographs documenting nuclear tests and other military operations. This clandestine operation was part of a broader strategy to influence public perception through media. The proximity of this facility to the burgeoning counterculture movement in Laurel Canyon raises questions about potential intersections between military interests and the cultural developments of the time. Some researchers suggest that the concentration of influential musicians in this area was not purely coincidental, but part of a larger strategy to influence culture and public perception. The Wax Museum, MKUltra, and the manipulation of minds. Parallel to these developments, the CIA's MKUltra program was conducting experiments aimed at mind control and behavioral manipulation. These experiments often involved the use of psychedelics, like LSD, to alter consciousness and study their effects on the human mind. The program's reach extended into various facets of society, including the entertainment MKUltra to the Laurel Canyon music scene remains elusive. The timing and nature of these operations suggest a possible overlap. The influx of young, influential artists into a secluded area with a history of military activity and media influence presents a scenario ripe for covert operations aimed at cultural manipulation. The Manson Connection, a case study in manipulation. The tragic events surrounding Charles Manson and his followers further complicate the narrative of Laurel Canyon. Manson's connections with members of the music community, including Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys, have been well documented. These associations have fueled conspiracy theories suggesting that Manson's activities were part of a larger, orchestrated effort to disrupt the counterculture movement. Investigative journalist Tom O'Neill's book, Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s delves into the possibility that Manson was influenced by MKUltra-like experiments. O'Neill suggests that Manson's interactions with figures associated with the CIA and his ability to manipulate his followers may have been facilitated by psychological conditioning techniques. Charles Manson, the Manchurian Candidate of the counterculture. The 1969 Tate LaBianca murders, orchestrated by Charles Manson and his followers, shocked the world. Official narratives have long attributed these heinous acts to Manson's delusional beliefs and manipulative charisma. However, investigative journalist Tom O'Neill's exhaustive research, detailed in his 2019 book Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s, suggests a more complex story. O'Neill's work raises the possibility that Manson's ability to incite such violence may have been influenced, if not facilitated, by covert government operations, particularly the CIA's MKULTRA program. MKULTRA, the CIA's mind control experiments. Project MKULTRA was a covert CIA program initiated in the early 1950s, aimed at researching mind control techniques. The program explored various methods, including the administration of LSD, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and other psychological manipulations, often without the consent of the subjects. The goal was to develop techniques that could be used for interrogation and to create individuals who could be controlled or manipulated. The program was officially halted in the early 1960s, but its legacy and the extent of its operations remain subjects of controversy and speculation. Manson's background, a troubling history. Charles Manson's early life was marked by instability and encounters with the law. After spending much of his youth in reformatories and prisons, Manson emerged in the 1960s as a charismatic figure who attracted a group of followers known as the Manson family. He preached a blend of apocalyptic beliefs, racial tensions, and free love, drawing heavily from the countercultural movements of the time. Despite his criminal background, Manson was able to move through various circles in Los Angeles, including the music industry, where he briefly interacted with figures like Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys. The Haight-Ashbury connection. Manson's interactions with the Haight-Ashbury community in San Francisco, a hub for the 1960s counterculture, are of particular interest. The Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, frequented by Manson and his followers, was reportedly involved in research related to mind control techniques. Dr. Louis "Jolly" West, a psychiatrist with alleged CIA ties, conducted studies on hypnosis and behavior modification at this clinic. While there is no direct evidence linking Manson to Dr. West's experiments, the overlap in locations and the nature of the research raise questions about potential connections. The role of Dr. Louis "Jolly" West. Dr. Louis West, often referred to as Jolly, was a psychiatrist known for his work in the field of mind control and behavior modification. He conducted research on hypnosis and was involved in studies that explored the effects of drugs like LSD on human behavior. Dr. West's work reportedly included efforts to deprogram individuals who had been involved in cults, raising further questions about his methods and objectives. Some researchers have speculated that Manson's ability to manipulate his followers could have been influenced by techniques developed or studied by individuals like Dr. West. The helter-skelter narrative and its discontents. The official narrative of the Manson murders, popularized by prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi in his book Helter-Skelter, posits that Manson believed in an impending race war and orchestrated the murders to incite this conflict. However, O'Neill's investigation challenges this theory, suggesting that the helter-skelter motive may have been a constructed narrative to simplify a more complex situation. O'Neill uncovered evidence of prosecutorial misconduct and suppression of exculpatory evidence, indicating that the case may have been manipulated for political purposes. Government surveillance and COINTELPRO. During the 1960s, the FBI conducted a covert program known as COINTELPRO, Counterintelligence Program, aimed at surveilling and disrupting domestic political organizations deemed subversive. This included monitoring civil rights groups, anti-war activists, and other left-wing organizations. The overlap between the targets of COINTELPRO and the counterculture movement suggests that the government was actively working to suppress dissenting voices. Some researchers have speculated that Manson's activities may have been influenced by these broader efforts to control or discredit the counterculture. The case for government involvement. While definitive evidence linking the CIA or MK MKUltra directly to Manson's actions remains elusive. Several factors suggest a possible connection. Manson's background, his history of incarceration and interactions with various institutions may have made him a candidate for manipulation or observation. The Haight-Ashbury connection, his presence in areas associated with mind control research, raises questions about potential exposure to such experiments. The role of Dr. West, his involvement in behavior modification studies, and his interactions with individuals in the counterculture community suggest a possible link to Manson's activities. Suppression of evidence. O'Neill's findings of hidden documents and suppressed evidence indicate that the official narrative may have been manipulated. The possibility that Charles Manson was influenced, if not manipulated, by government programs like MKUltra adds a layer of complexity to the understanding of the Tate LaBianca murders. While direct evidence remains circumstantial, the patterns and connections uncovered by O'Neill's research warrant further investigation. As the documentary adaptation of Chaos continues to spark discussion, it challenges us to reconsider the narratives we've been taught and to question the extent of governmental influence on individual actions. Cultural impact and legacy. Despite the dark undercurrents, the music produced in Laurel Canyon during this period has left a lasting impact on American culture. The fusion of folk, rock, and psychedelic sounds resonated with a generation seeking change and self-expression. However, understanding the full extent of the forces at play during this time requires acknowledging the potential influence of covert operations like MKUltra and the strategic placement of military facilities within cultural epicenters. Laurel Canyon stands as a testament to a unique period in American cultural history. Its blend of artistic innovation and shadowy associations invites ongoing exploration and debate. Whether viewed as a genuine haven for creativity or a focal point of societal manipulation, the Canyon's story remains a compelling chapter in the narrative of 20th century impact. The exposure of MKUltra had far-reaching consequences. Ethical reforms. In the realm of science and medicine, the scandal highlighted the need for stricter protections of human subjects. The Belmont Report, 1979, codified principles of respect, beneficence, and justice in research ethics, building on the earlier Nuremberg Code. Institutional review boards, IRBs, became mandatory for federally funded research, ensuring informed consent and oversight. Cultural fascination. Culturally, MKUltra became a touchstone for conspiracy theories and works of fiction. Films like The Manchurian Candidate and later shows like Stranger Things drew inspiration from the idea of government mind control programs. MKUltra entered the lexicon of skepticism, symbolizing the dangers of unchecked government power. Continuing secrecy. Despite declassification, many questions remain unanswered. How many people were victimized? Did any techniques prove effective in intelligence operations? Were other programs quietly continued under different names? The destruction of records means definitive answers are impossible. Yet the confirmed facts are disturbing enough. MKUltra stands as a reminder that even in democratic societies, fear and secrecy can corrode ethical boundaries. Project MKUltra was born from Cold War paranoia and driven by an insatiable quest for control over the human mind. Over 2 decades, it subjected unwitting subjects to drugs, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and psychological torment, leaving behind a legacy of broken lives and unanswered questions. Though it failed to achieve its fantastical goals of mind control, it succeeded in demonstrating how science can be corrupted when unmoored from ethics. The exposure of MKUltra forced the United States to confront its darker impulses and contributed to reforms in research ethics and government oversight. Yet it also seeded a lasting distrust of authority, fueling cultural fascination and conspiracy thinking. Ultimately, MKUltra's story is not only about the past, but about the future, a warning of what can happen when secrecy and power collide, and a reminder that the protection of human rights must remain at the center of scientific and political life. Projects ongoing since MKULTRA. When the CIA officially ended MKULTRA in 1973 and destroyed most of its records, it did not mark the end of U.S. government interest in mind control, psychological warfare, or behavioral science. Instead, many of the program's goals and methods appear to have been absorbed into new initiatives, rebranded under different names, and justified under new national security concerns. MKULTRA's successor programs. Declassified documents and congressional reports hint at a lineage of projects that carried forward MKULTRA's research. Some examples include MKSEARCH 1964-1972, a direct continuation of MKULTRA. MKSEARCH focused on developing chemical, biological, and radiological techniques for controlling behavior. Unlike the sprawling early years of MKULTRA, MKSEARCH was more targeted, focusing on operational applications. MKSEARCH, the CIA's continuation of mind control research. Introduction. Following the official termination of Project MKULTRA in 1964, the CIA transitioned its mind control research into a successor program known as MKSEARCH. This covert initiative, operating from 1965 to 1971, continued to explore behavioral modification techniques, including the use of chemical, biological, and radiological agents, often without informed consent. Origins and objectives. MKSEARCH was established as a continuation of MKULTRA, with a focus on developing and testing incapacitating agents for potential use in covert operations. The program aimed to produce predictable human behavioral and physiological changes through the use of various substances and techniques. It was a joint effort between the CIA's Office of Research and Development and the U.S. Army Chemical Corps. Subprojects and collaborations. MKSEARCH encompassed several subprojects, including MKOFTEN and MKCHICKWIT. MKOFTEN focused on testing and evaluating the toxicological effects and behavioral impacts of various drugs on animals, with the potential for human application. MKCHICKWIT involved acquiring information on new drug developments in Europe and Asia, as well as obtaining samples for research purposes. The program also involved collaboration with various institutions and researchers, often through grants provided by CIA front organizations. These collaborations allowed the CIA to conduct research while maintaining a level of separation from the institutions involved. In some cases, researchers were unaware that their work was being funded by the CIA. Methods and techniques. MKSEARCH employed a range of methods to achieve its objectives, including chemical agents. The program investigated various chemical substances for their potential to alter human behavior and physiology. Biological agents. Research was conducted into the use of biological agents that could incapacitate individuals without causing permanent harm. Radiological agents. The program explored the use of radiological substances for their potential effects on human behavior. Psychological techniques. MKSEARCH continued to explore psychological methods, including hypnosis and sensory deprivation, to influence behavior. These methods were often tested on human subjects without their informed consent, raising significant ethical and legal concerns. Oversight and termination. Despite the continuation of MKSEARCH, oversight of such programs remained limited. The Church Committee hearings in the mid-1970s brought public attention to the CIA's mind control experiments, leading to increased scrutiny and calls for accountability. As a result, MKSEARCH was officially terminated in 1971. However, the legacy of these programs continues to raise questions about government overreach and the ethical implications of behavioral research. Legacy and impact. MKSEARCH program, along with its predecessor MKULTRA, has had a lasting impact on public trust in government institutions and the ethical standards of scientific research. The use of unknowing human subjects in experiments has led to calls for stricter ethical guidelines and oversight in research involving human participants. Additionally, the programs have contributed to ongoing debates about the balance between national security interests and individual rights. MKULTRA represents a dark chapter in the history of intelligence operations, highlighting the lengths to which agencies may go in the pursuit of behavioral control. While the program was officially terminated decades ago, its legacy serves as a cautionary tale about the potential for abuse in the name of national security. The lessons learned from MKULTRA continue to inform discussions on ethical standards in research and the importance of transparency and accountability in government actions. MKULTRA, 1950s–1970, conducted in collaboration with the U.S. Army's Special Operations Division, MKULTRA focused on developing and stockpiling biological and chemical agents. Some of these overlapped with MKULTRA's exploration of incapacitating chemicals. MKULTRA, the CIA's covert biological warfare program. Project MKULTRA was a clandestine research initiative conducted by the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, in collaboration with the U.S. Department of Defense during the 1950s through the early 1970s. This program focused on the development and stockpiling of biological and chemical agents intended for use in covert operations. It is often considered a successor to MKULTRA, the CIA's mind control program, and was part of a broader effort to enhance the United States' capabilities in biological warfare. The primary objective of MKULTRA was to provide the CIA's Technical Services Division, TSD, with a covert support base to meet its top-secret operational requirements. This involved developing a robust arsenal of lethal and incapacitating materials, including poisons and biological agents, and creating devices for their delivery. The program aimed to ensure that the TSD could serve as a center for supplying biological and chemical materials for covert operations. Development and testing. MKULTRA encompassed several sub-projects that focused on the development and testing of biological agents and delivery systems. These included poison dart guns, modified firearms capable of delivering biological agents via darts, designed to incapacitate or eliminate targets discreetly. Poison pills, capsules containing lethal substances intended for covert administration to individuals. Biological agent delivery systems, devices and methods for dispersing biological agents in various operational scenarios. The U.S. Army's Special Operations Command, SOCH, assisted the CIA with development, testing, and maintenance procedures for these biological agents and delivery systems. Both the CIA and SOCH modified guns to fire special darts coated with biological agents and poisonous pills. The darts could incapacitate guard dogs, allowing agents to infiltrate the area that the dogs were guarding, and would then be used to awaken the dogs upon exiting the facility. Controversies and ethical concerns. The activities conducted under MKULTRA raised significant ethical and legal concerns. The program operated without the authority of Congress or the President, leading to questions about its legality and oversight. Additionally, the development and testing of biological agents without informed consent from potential targets contravened established ethical standards in research and warfare. Termination and legacy. In November 1969, President Richard Nixon banned any military use of biological weapons, leading to the dissolution of Project MKULTRA. Subsequently, on February 14, 1970, a presidential order outlawed all stockpiles of bacteriological weapons and non-living toxins. However, despite these directives, a CIA scientist was able to acquire an estimated 11 grams of deadly shellfish toxin from SOCH personnel at Fort Detrick. The toxin was stored in a CIA laboratory where it remained undetected for over 5 years. The legacy of MKULTRA continues to influence discussions on the ethical conduct of covert operations and the oversight of intelligence agencies. The program's existence was revealed through investigations by the Church Committee in the 1970s, which uncovered numerous instances of covert activities by the CIA and other intelligence agencies. These revelations led to reforms aimed at increasing transparency and accountability within the intelligence community. Project MKNAOMI represents a significant chapter in the history of U.S. intelligence operations, highlighting the lengths to which agencies may go in the pursuit of strategic objectives. While the program was officially terminated decades ago, its legacy serves as a cautionary tale about the potential for abuse in the name of national security. The lessons learned from MKNAOMI continue to inform discussions on ethical standards in research and the importance of transparency and accountability in government actions. MKULTRA. This designation applied to the use of MKULTRA techniques abroad, particularly in covert operations. Drugs, hypnosis, and psychological manipulation were tested in real-world intelligence missions. Project MKULTRA was a covert operation conducted by the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, during the Cold War era, serving as the operational counterpart to the research and development phase of MKULTRA. While MKULTRA focused on the development of chemical, biological, and radiological materials capable of controlling human behavior, MKULTRA was established to govern the use of these materials in clandestine operations. Establishment and purpose. In October 1952, MKULTRA was formally established to manage the deployment of MKULTRA materials in covert operations. The program was designed to ensure that the CIA could utilize these substances effectively and discreetly in various clandestine activities, including interrogations, discrediting individuals, and disabling targets. Operational use and scope. According to a 1963 report by the CIA's Inspector General, MKULTRA materials were used in numerous operations abroad, beginning as early as 1953. These materials were primarily employed to aid in interrogations, but they were also used for harassment, discrediting, or disabling purposes. The report notes that by 1963, the number of operations and subjects involved had increased substantially. The substances developed under MKULTRA and employed through MKULTRA included various chemical and biological agents, some of which were tested on unwitting subjects. The effectiveness of these substances on individuals at all social levels, both domestic and foreign, was of significant interest to the CIA. Ethical and legal concerns. The use of MKULTRA and MKULTRA materials raised serious ethical and legal questions, particularly regarding the lack of informed consent from individuals subjected to these substances. The Church Committee's investigation into the CIA's activities highlighted the agency's disregard for ethical standards in its pursuit of behavioral control techniques. The destruction of MKULTRA records in 1973 further complicated efforts to fully understand the extent of MKULTRA's operations. The surviving documents and testimonies from the Church Committee's investigation provide limited insight into the specific details of these covert activities. The revelations about MKULTRA and its associated programs have had a lasting impact on public trust in government institutions and the ethical standards of scientific research. The exposure of these covert operations led to increased scrutiny and calls for accountability within the intelligence community. Subsequent reforms aim to establish stricter ethical guidelines and oversight in research involving human participants. Project MKULTRA represents a significant chapter in the history of U.S. intelligence operations, illustrating the lengths to which agencies may go in the pursuit of strategic objectives. While the program was officially terminated decades ago, its legacy serves as a cautionary tale about the potential for abuse in the name of national security. The lessons learned from MKULTRA continue to inform discussions on ethical standards in research and the importance of transparency and accountability in government actions. These projects suggest that the closure of MKUltra was less a moral reckoning and more a bureaucratic reshuffling. Mind control in the post-MKUltra era. Even after the CIA claimed to have shut down MKUltra, U.S. military and intelligence agencies continued to invest in research on human behavior and control. Some of the areas explored included psychological operations, PSYOPS. Expanding beyond individual mind control, the U.S. military embraced mass psychological manipulation. This included propaganda campaigns, information warfare, and perception management designed to influence populations at scale. Non-lethal weapons research. Projects in the 1980s and 1990s explored electromagnetic and acoustic weapons intended to disorient or incapacitate individuals without killing them. While not identical to MKUltra, these technologies raised similar ethical concerns. Neuroscience and DARPA. In the 2000s and 2010s, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, launched initiatives exploring brain, computer interfaces, memory manipulation, and cognitive enhancement. While officially framed as medical or defensive research, some critics argue that these programs echo MKUltra's pursuit of behavioral control and enhanced interrogation. The post-9/11 era revived some of the same debates that had haunted MKUltra. Reports from Guantanamo Bay and CIA black sites revealed the use of sleep deprivation, sensory deprivation, stress positions, and drugs during interrogations of terrorism suspects. While framed as counterterrorism measures, these methods closely paralleled earlier CIA research on breaking down human resistance. The Senate Intelligence Committee's 2014 report on CIA torture acknowledged the influence of past behavioral research, even if officials denied direct ties to MKUltra. Critics argue that MKUltra laid the conceptual groundwork for the enhanced interrogation techniques that became infamous during the War on Terror. Contemporary concerns, surveillance and manipulation. Today, the specter of MKUltra haunts discussions about technology, neuroscience, and social control. Some areas of concern include big data and psychological profiling. Modern surveillance and algorithmic profiling allow unprecedented insight into human behavior. While not mind control in the classic MKUltra sense, the ability of platforms to manipulate attention, belief, and decision-making has drawn comparisons. Neurotechnology and brain hacking. Ongoing research into brain stimulation, memory editing, and brain-computer interfaces raises ethical questions similar to those posed by MKUltra. How will governments use or misuse such technologies? Conspiracy and mistrust. For many, MKUltra symbolizes proof that governments will violate ethics in the name of security. This legacy has fueled skepticism toward new programs in neuroscience and defense, regardless of their stated purpose. A legacy of continuity. While MKUltra itself was officially terminated in the early 1970s, its legacy endures in ongoing research, military doctrine, and cultural memory. The quest to manipulate the mind did not vanish. It evolved with new tools, new justifications, and new secrecy. The story of MKUltra, therefore, is not only about a dark chapter in history, but about a continuing tension. How far should governments go in the pursuit of psychological advantage, and what safeguards are needed to protect individuals from becoming test subjects in the shadows of national security?